Hello, everyone. We are live on YouTube live stream. We'll give it a couple of minutes for others to join before we get started. Well, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Sneh Kumar. I'm the Global Director of Sustainability and ESG for Arconic's building and construction business, which includes Kawneer. Typically, we do a webinar, which is AIA accredited every month, but this time we are doing something new. So it is our first live stream, and I have two guests with me. I'm excited to talk to them about on the topic of holistic sustainability. So welcome everyone. In terms of housekeeping, we want to keep it interactive. I know you cannot ask your question verbally, but use the feature to type in your question, and we will be monitoring it and answer any questions which you may have. So I have Alistair Riley, who is a design partner and sustainability leader at William McDonough and Partners, with over 20 years of experience, and is known for his innovative and sustainable solution with some marquee projects like NASA's Sustainability Base and Google's Master Planning. And my second guest is Michelle Molly. She is the managing director at MBDC, which is a certification assessment firm for cradle to cradle certification. So welcome you both. Let's start with, again, further introduction to your firm, what you do, as well as what got you started in this intersection of sustainability and architecture. So maybe, Alistair, if you could go first. And
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm an architect, design partner with William McDonough Partners. My parents immigrated to the States from Scotland in the 60s, and my great uncle actually oversaw the British Embassy construction around the world. So I was introduced to buildings and constructions quite early, and then in the 70s, energy crisis efficiency became a critical thing. So I think that led me into my interest in buildings and sustainability, and then eventually into architecture.
Well, excited to have you here, Michelle.
Yeah, so I guess my interest in sustainable product development started with my parents as well, and my mom has been designing reusable diapers since I was born, and I think that sparked my interest growing up. And then in the early 2000s, I started to learn about LEED as it was launching, and that got me interested in specifically sustainability for the built environment. And then, fast forward a few years from that, I read Cradle to Cradle, and that really, changed the course of my career. And I went back and got my master's in environmental management and sustainability. And and then, fast forward from that, I had the opportunity to come and work under Bill McDonough, who wrote the book Cradle to Cradle. And I got to come back to my hometown, Charlottesville, Virginia. So yeah, so excited to be here. Thanks, Sneh.
Nice. Thank you both for being here. And those who are listening, there's QR code for the LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with us if you'd like. So we'll leave that QR code for one more minute. In terms of, again, different background, you mentioned about the energy crisis in 70s, reusable products. Again, when we think of built environment, one of the question, I always ask myself on anytime you're solving a problem is why. And so what's the impact of buildings? Why should we care for sustainability and buildings or architecture? Is often, again, not clearly understood. Those of us inside the built environment, obviously, we understand some of the impact of it. So maybe Alistair, what's the impact of building, and why should we care for this, intersection of sustainability and buildings?
Well, I think you'll go into some of the big numbers, but when you look at the building environment having some 40% impact, that's on emissions for operational embodied carbon, and just the idea of material scarcity, which we're seeing now in batteries and heavy metals, but the idea of reuse. So the idea of utilizing not just recycled materials, but materials that can be reused, recycled over time. But I think that critical one in your chart on the left there is that building operations as well as the embodied impact. And part of that, again, is tied into that material resource.
Yeah, so Michelle, can you help us differentiate between operational carbon and embodied carbon?
Sure. So through the process of cradle to cradle, we look at all different emissions factors at the facility level, vehicles that are transporting materials between raw materials between facilities. So embodied carbon is really, you have to go back into the supply chain and the beginning of the product, the raw materials. Whereas at the facility level, you're just looking at the scope 1, scope 2. So yeah, it's I think just in general, certification programs and reporting programs, I think they help you to just identify these different areas of data and information that you need to be tracking to really understand the impact of, whether you're a designer or a purchaser of products or manufacturer of products, marketer of products. To really understand your impact, you need to understand where the products come from and how they're being manufactured and so forth.
Thank you.
And I was going to jump in. I think the other critical piece is that the 90% of people spending time indoors. So that connection, what E.O. Wilson called biophilia, and innate connection to nature, to outdoors. It's critical to have that connection through daylight, through access to nature, to connect people as they're in the office and that.
That's a good point. So when you design projects, is that an active consideration that people are spending 90% of the time indoor, and what environment they want to you want to create for them?
Sure. No, and I think we're seeing that coming out of COVID, the trend again to be able to open your window, to have access to daylight and nature, but a focus on indoor air quality as well. So to make sure we're breathing healthy air, and part of what Michelle's doing in MBDC is understanding the VOC, the impact of some of these materials, especially on the interior side, on people's health. So I think, yes, we're focused on that, and certainly we're seeing that at the corporate level, where again, Google and the Walmarts of the world have corporate standards that kind of meet and exceed some of the European standards for access to daylight. And again, a big piece of that is obviously optimizing that for glare control, but again, the visibility of connection outdoors.
And then you did mention about the resource scarcity, and when we look into it, how the world economy is today, it's only 7% is circular. I mean, the rest of the economic model is, extract, use, and discard those material. Again, we have finite resources on Earth. We don't have unlimited resources. It's important to kind of understand that this linear economy model is just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And integrating circular design principles in the architecture becomes important and critical as you look through the material selection as well as what happens to material at the end of their life.
Sure.
And also share like one of the other aspects. So we talked about energy and circularity, and people are spending time. One other aspect, which is indirectly connected, and I was surprised when I learned about it, is that around 28 million people, as per International Labour Organization, still live in the condition of forced labor. One of the things we are looking and trying to do is how we, as a purchaser as well as a producer, do not encourage that. We are looking to not buy materials from folks who may be using forced labor, so that we are not enabling and encouraging that. So that's been again a big part of looking at the greenhouse gas emissions, the circularity, how people are whether people are being treated fairly in the manufacturing processes across the value chain, and then contrast that with people are spending a lot of time indoor. So obviously buildings have significant environmental impact, but we also spend time indoors, so we need to be able to balance it. And what I say sometimes is that the buildings need to serve its occupants. So people need to be healthy, productive, and comfortable inside a building. So significant. So we have learned the definition of sustainability as, again, meeting the needs of today without compromising the need of future generation. When we say holistic sustainability, Alistair, what does it mean? And when you look at, broadly, how does that apply to architecture?
Sure.
And how do you use it in your practice?
Well, for us, I think we're trying to think beyond sustainability. So can we think, regenerative solutions? So that's where we've got what we call the 5 goods, which is based on the cradle to cradle material approach. But that's a design project approach. So when we think about clean energy and emissions, as you pointed out in that first chart, it's a major factor. So we're making sure we're utilizing clean, renewable energy, and a big piece of that is efficiency, and that's part of some of the infrastructure build in the U.S. is that focus on retrofit. So energy efficiency is critical, so reduce your demand and then optimize for renewable. Michelle will go into material health, so there's obviously making sure there is a chain of custody, transparency, and the materials, and we're putting safe, healthy materials first in our buildings. And part of that is a focus on decarbonizing, which is the low embodied materials. When we think of water, we think of treat water as a precious resource. So we're only using potable water for necessary, treating water as much as possible, and using gray and sometimes black water collection to reutilize that water. And as you point out, the circular economy is a critical piece. And as designers, we come into that with the idea of designing for next use. So we're thinking about not only how the buildings go together, can be easily assembled, but taken apart or designed for next use over time. And that goes from the building structure down to the materials to the furniture. Are the manufacturers having take-back programs for the curtain wall, for carpet? We see Shaw doing that with some of their raw goods. And Good Lives, as you said, is the occupant health. So we're focused on the people, the users, making sure they've got, well day-lit, naturally ventilated buildings, if possible, but also thinking about the impact of those materials in the chain of custody as well as the transparency. So that's kind of how we approach it holistically, and again, are able to look at some of these. But how do we, again, focus on regenerative, not just trying to do less, but doing more good.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. I think this slide kind of like hits the all the key areas and tries to kind of like again expands what holistic sustainability is. It's not just the carbon, it's not just the water. It's also occupants. It's also how you're procuring your material and how you're manufacturing. What type of energy you're using to produce these things. So obviously, it broadens the definition and understanding of what does it mean to be sustainable building.
Yeah.
Michelle, when you look at this from a product certification or product evaluation point of view, what does holistic sustainability approach mean?
Yeah, so from a product standpoint, once it gets to the design phase, the certification is helping designers like Alistair make these decisions on what the impact actually is of those products. So we are, digging into the detail of the product, the life cycle of the product, from raw material extraction to ready for sale. So we look at five different areas, and we have a team of environmental scientists and chemists and toxicologists. The chemists and the toxicologists, they're focused on material health and product circularity. So, and everything really starts with the bill of materials and understanding what's in your product. If you don't know that, then we can't even go to the next step, really, because we don't know what to assess. So those details and having access to that data and having transparency as a manufacturer is really important to be able to deliver a certified product, or to be able to go through this process and to really understand the impact of your product. So it starts with material health, and there's a restricted substance list that was created by the Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute. And product circularity, that gets into what you're saying, active cycling. Can it actually be recycled? Can it actually be disassembled?
So, Michelle, I want to maybe pause you a little bit and go back to the material health before we jump into the circularity. Sure. So, could you talk a little bit more? Obviously, we want to better understand, like, what does it mean, material health? What is banned list or red list? Could you help us better understand why it's important from product design and use of these materials, or restricting or other use of these?
For example, your average SDS, it only goes to 0.1% of a product. But for Cradle to Cradle, you need to go to 0.01% of the homogeneous material. So if you have a multi-material product where even the transparency labels out there, they don't go to that level of detail for the individual components. But we do, to ensure that there are no restricted substances. So you're talking about like heavy metals, everything on REACH. And then there's the next level. So we do have 4 different levels in Cradle to Cradle. And you can only get past the bronze level if you do not have any CMRs, carcinogens, mutagenic, reproductive disruptors. And then you go to the next level, and beyond silver, you're going to gold, and then platinum. You cannot have any skin sensitizers, respiratory irritants. So there's a couple different layers that you can go up to. And the goal of getting into the Cradle to Cradle program, or really any certification program, finding out what you have, is to understand what needs to be changed, what needs to be optimized, can it be optimized, and identifying those different chemicals or alternatives to eliminate the banned substances and the and substances that are could impact human health in other ways.
Yeah, so obviously these materials we know are not good for human health, but there are several of the ingredient lists, like banned list or red list. These are different. These are, let's say, from regulation perspective, they are allowed, or they are not banned. But what Cradle to Cradle and similar product certifications are doing is trying to educate the market or create a list that, again, hey, these are the chemicals which are harmful, and
Yeah,
differentiate.
it goes beyond regulation.
It's beyond real. Okay.
And that's why, this is for more progressive
Right.
companies. And the whole framework, it offers a backbone for becoming sustainable, especially if you're a manufacturer or a marketer of products. It allows you to really dig into and organize the data that you have around your products and potential impacts. And like you said, we are looking at human health, but we're also looking at the facility level. When you get to water and soil stewardship, we're looking at impacts on the effluent coming out of that building and the surrounding community. Are the waterways impacted by the chemicals that are going into that effluent? Are they, disposing of it in a responsible way? Are they testing it to ensure that it meets the requirements? So, it's really a fact-checking process, and verification, I think, is key to being able to make sustainability claims going forward.
So, Alistair, I know you mentioned about material health. Again, do you see more and more use of, and focus on the material health side?
Yeah, again, certainly at the government level, and certainly California it's led in some of that in POCs and especially in the EU now. But I think one other critical piece to critical is the material health is at the top, because again, we want to make sure we're getting rid of banned substance, red list free, and again, incorporating those safe, healthy materials before we bring in circularity, because we don't want to be circulating toxins, things like that. There are things like mercury, cadmium, things that when you think of an Apple computer or laptop, we want those to go back to manufacturing for reuse, and that's again into the battery. So I think the focus on material, get rid of the bad materials. As architects, can we look at that? And again, we're seeing companies, Google's, the Walmart's, even Amazon, using that cradle to cradle as a preference. So we're preferring cradle to cradle, and that has all the transparency and background that Michelle talked about. So we're getting rid of the bad things, and then understanding the next level: can these products be recyclable? And again, part of it as architects is thinking about that design for disassembly. How can these components, buildings, products be taken apart and still, maintain some other asset value?
And to add on to that, sometimes, material health and product circularity, they do fight against each other a little bit. And it's tough to get that balance, because recycled content, it is very difficult to have a fully controlled feedstock of, milk jugs. That's very high value material for recycling, but there's so many other streams of recycled material. And so a lot of testing is involved to make sure that, there are no banned substances or heavy metals in that content.
Yeah. So yeah, I think recyclable and recycled content. I see some other pointers in terms of you mentioned, Alistair, design for disassembly. I mean, like thinking through what's going to happen at the end of the life, right? Whether that material's going to come back into the economy or go to landfill. We don't want that. So
yeah,
that's really good. Oh.
I was going to say, your first slide, you had some, 7% of material in circulation. So I think that what we call end of use, because their materials are not necessarily living things, but again, if it's biological or technical, can it be aluminum, again, like a laptop or a Kawneer curtain wall, taken back for manufacturing and reuse? That's critical. That we prefer use those materials we know that can have a next use or be taken back for production.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, the good thing from our perspective, or at least let's say, a metal-based product supplier perspective, I mean, it is estimated more than 90% of the metal when the building is decommissioned gets recycled. So there is known value, economic value of the metal coming out, and also there is infrastructure out there where people can send it, it gets recycled, reused. So Let's move to the next pillar of social fairness. Michelle, what does that mean, and how does Cradle to Cradle look into it, and why it's important?
Sure. So, I mean, it's a huge part of the supply chain investigation because, that especially, with natural fibers and things, they're coming from, crops. And so, just as an example, cotton and evaluating where that cotton is coming from was that land intended for cotton or other types of agriculture? So making sure that the workers are, have protective equipment and have all of the necessary access to clean water and, working hours, making sure that everything that led up to that product that's being sold is being handled appropriately and everyone is being treated fairly along the way, not just at the first tier, not just at the final manufacturer, but all the way down to raw material extraction. So each layer is important. And I think, sometimes that does get a little lost because that's not as highly regulated, but a lot of our companies, they'll reach out through their supplier questionnaires and requirements and to confirm, that they are in compliance. And I think, programs like Cradle to Cradle, they encourage that and kind of push them to go even beyond that to tier 2 and tier 3.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, I can share from our side. I mean, obviously, that's something we have started doing. Obviously, there are regulations around it, but that concerns with how you operate, right? Not goes beyond to tier 1, tier 2, and deeper. So Kawneer has gone through a supply chain assessment and certification where we have looked at a third party to evaluate us in terms of how we treat people inside, in our manufacturing, in terms of our safety, in terms of our work practice, and then also at our suppliers of where they manufacture and how they are treating their people. Are they violating any human rights? We looked at the numbers around the forced labor condition. So we don't want to be buying and enabling, continued, human rights violations through that. So we have gone through a third-party assessment. It's called EcoVadis. So we are on that journey where we have done EcoVadis assessment for ourselves and also asking all our key suppliers to undergo that so that we and our entire value chain can move in the right direction. So, Alistair, how do you see that, being a part of, obviously, this is different than the product performance, right?
Yeah.
The social fairness. And so how do you incorporate that when you're thinking about product selection and in your design?
Well, I think part of that is where the cradle to cradle certification and just now as architects the access to EPDs, environmental product declaration. So understanding the transparency of what's in the products, but I think that supply chain transparency too, where the product's coming from, and certainly from the carbon impact, the transport cost of some of those materials. So I think that social fairness piece is key. And again, I think there's manufacturers are kind of coming forward with the EBT sheets and some of the digital software out there like EC3 that allows you to understand the impact of these products and again down to whether it's the water that's coming out of the buildings or the social fairness around living wages for the employees.
That's a good point. So basically, having this type of certification gives you some level of confidence that a product is meeting, carbon perspective, circularity perspective, social fairness perspective, as well as how they're operating and the impact on the water and the soil environment they operate in. So kind of like completes a little more holistic view.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michelle, could you talk us how did the cradle to cradle evolution has happened, and I just give our viewers a little bit insight into what was the genesis of it?
Sure. Well, it started with our founder, Bill McDonough, and Michael Braungart wrote the book Cradle to Cradle, which combined design aspects with chemistry. And the point was to look at, the product before it goes into its use phase, as it's sold. What is the safety level of that product, and digging deeper than what is publicly available, really, and being able to do those supply chain investigations to find out, actually the health of every single material in the product, and then the reusability of that product, and having all 5 aspects of kind of like at the facility level, corporate level, and then product level. Corporate level being, social fairness policies around, materials that are accepted, banned substances, and supply chain investigations, and then clean air, climate protection, water and soil stewardship. Those are other aspects that are really looked at the facility level, the manufacturing level, and so it's really the only all-encompassing certification that exists. It has gone through evolution. So now it's in version 4.1, which is the most rigorous certification in the world for a product. So it's very difficult, and it can take a lot of time. But like you were saying, it's at this point where every single pillar, every single one of these 5 categories really goes deep and prepares a company to be able to report on every aspect of their production and their supply chain from a sustainability standpoint. So this can really be a roadmap, where it's a certification. It's also a roadmap for reporting for companies.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is it's not just looking at the product, but also the manufacturer or the company and how they operate and
Yes.
what their practices are. So it's kind of like not just the product, but also the company and more broadly. And my understanding is this started 20 years ago. So it's more than 20 years ago. So it's really visionary that even at that point, this holistic framework was there. So kudos to those visionary leaders for thinking through and understanding what's important. So
MBDC, and just a little more history. MBDC was actually kind of served in the role of the institute up until about 2010, and then I think Bill puts it, we didn't want to be grading our own homework, and I think he saw the value of verification earlier on, that a third party really needs to be verifying this data, and there needs to be impartiality there. And as we've seen with, self-reporting, it is very one-sided. So having that third party. So now there's the Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute, and they manage all of the requirements and the certification scheme and the issuance of certifications. And so MBDC, and there are 8 other assessment bodies. We do material health assessment and the general assessment of the cradle to cradle certification process.
Yeah. So
we do the verification, really, of the data.
I was going to add, I think one of the unique things too about cradle to cradle certification is it, invites manufacturers to get certified, but it's also got a constant improvement component where they're asking companies to recertify and actually improve the product along the line. So they may find out they've got, a bad chemical, a bad something to get to the baseline criteria, but they've got, opportunities to optimize that and increase, the certification level.
That's a good point. So it's basically takes them on the journey, not that you have reached a goalpost. So and that's true for sustainability. It's a continuous journey in terms of continuing to improve and get better. I mean, Kawneer has gone through for some of our key products cradle to cradle certification. And we are looking to expand our portfolio of cradle to cradle product offering so that architects and others can utilize that in their product design. So I want to switch gear a little bit. So obviously, we look at the impact of the building and then what holistic sustainability means. Maybe I'll turn to Alistair. How do you use when you're designing your building and planning? How do you use that in your project, and how do you integrate product certification is one aspect, but how do you integrate that in your design process? If you can walk us through and share through some examples, what are the different criteria you're looking at?
Sure. And I think Bill would start that with, all sustainability is local. So each of our projects are kind of bespoke, designed around their place or location. This is NASA's sustainability base, Moffett Field. This is just south of Google's campus in Silicon Valley. But this was NASA's first new building in, I think, some 25 years. They were actually, designed by demolition. They had inefficient buildings that were taken out of service, moving employees into a new building. So there was a focus too on employee health. So wanted access to daylight, outdoors, things like that. They were in, again, 1920 kind of bunker buildings with limited light and kind of high workstations. There was also a cost piece to it. This was a government budget, and the Moffett Field has to be self-sustaining. So they had limited budget for maintenance operations too. So that was a key concern, that the building was easily to be maintained. We're in the seismic zone, so this building included a superstructure, which provides our cross bracing and provides kind of clean open space for the offices, but it's also an armature for shading, for daylight control, for our photovoltaics. Even we have vines growing that provide some of that buffer from east-west daylight shading in the afternoon. And again, up in the right is that focus on again, worker health, that connection outdoors. In this case, we've got windows on actuators, underfloor air, but windows you can step over and open up for your workstation. And this integrated, I think, a full system on the facade from Centria to Kawneer, curtain wall, as you mentioned, and Sullivan high efficiency glazing. So this building was, again, built on a federal budget. It was 50% below ASHRAE for energy, and actually produces more energy than it uses by renewable solar panels on the roof, as well as a geothermal field and a fuel cell that actually shares some of that energy back to the campus.
That's great. So you mentioned 50% lower energy than the ASHRAE baseline. That's significant.
And that was, again, a focus on a federal budget, but again, the director of that time of NASA was, focused on efficiency. So again, that high performance facade, the curtain wall system, as well as the glazing, to make sure we can meet those reduction targets early on. And that means, again, less renewable energy, less energy overall demand for the building.
How did you guys have goals or targets around the overall life cycle carbon for the building and optimization of that?
The carbon wasn't so much as a focus as resiliency was. So again, we're in a high seismic zone. So the buildings they were coming out of were going to be too expensive to retrofit for seismic. So the idea that these steel brace frames, some of the diagonals would bend torque in a seismic event without disrupting the building. So the ability for the team to come back online quickly. This is it's R&D offices for some of their climate scientists. So I think that, again, it was part of the not just a decarbonization stream, but a resiliency stream of how could they get back to business quickly without major retrofit.
That's, you mentioned resiliency, especially in a seismic zone, and with the climate change and the challenges, a 50-year, 100-year weather model or design models is getting challenged, and we can have a whole discussion around resiliency. But from your perspective, maybe for our viewers, if you could define what is resiliency and how do you incorporate that? I mean, you mentioned about it, but how do you plan a building for that?
Well, and again, it can go across those 5 criteria. So it can be resiliency on an energy thing. Do we have battery backups? In this case, we have fuel cells. Water scarcity is critical here. We do have some water storage, and we have gray water reuse on the campus. Again, that ability for the building to be maintained, resiliency as far as and I think the big one is again local. It's the climate. We're in the Bay Area, Northern California. We have the ability to open the windows. We don't have the humidity, so it's sort of a perfect environment for nighttime cooling to reduce some of those demands. And it gives, again, we did studies we looked at with the director having no air conditioning in this building and just do it with natural ventilation. And it turned out it was going to be 1-2 weeks a year where it wouldn't be optimal for employees. So we've got the air systems in there, but again, the building's designed that like a traditional building from the 50s or something. You can open the windows and you can breathe the air in that. The biggest issue we have is the outdoor air. Sometimes it's not as clean as the interiors there, based off transport or cars.
That's good. So
resiliency goes across all those criteria for us.
Definitely, and what I can share, especially on the seismic side, is we are also seeing, or from the structural point of view, is tightening and further going beyond codes in terms of what level of deflection you're wanting in the building. I mean, typical for structures is 2.5%, but people are making it less and less. So we are testing curtain wall. We have done seismic testing on our curtain wall, pretty much all our products, and published some of that information. But that's again part of tying resiliency to the structure.
Yeah.
In terms of different products, what Cradle to Cradle has been certified. So Michelle, Cradle to Cradle can certify a range of product, not just the facade product. Correct?
Right. Yeah. So it started out, of course, very focused on the built environment, mainly because of Bill's background, and a lot of the initial certification holders are from the built environment. But now we certify personal care products, clothing, apparel. So we do anything, lots of different biological nutrients and what we call technical nutrients. So it's really almost any product that is viable for the program. We can't certify a candle because the intended use is, it's not to be recycled, or we can't certify nail polish. So things like that, that are just not intended to be reused or recycled or go back into the biosphere. Those cannot qualify for Cradle to Cradle. But and we do. The Institute just came out with a new certification that is focused specifically on circularity. It still needs to, as you mentioned, like as Alistair mentioned, circularity is very important, but the material health in tandem with circularity is key, because we don't want to recycle or put things back into products or into the biosphere that are not fully healthy or that are not compliant. So it also has a component of health in there. Yeah. But we do. So you can either do a material health certificate that's focused on just the material health, or you can do product circularity, which has a component of material health, or you can do the full certification, which has all 5 and is very, very rigorous and gets into the facility and the corporate level.
That's good. So there are like different types of product which can go through this. And Alistair, when you're looking at your planning for your building and design, you have option to kind of like again look through the lens of the Cradle to Cradle and products which are bringing the holistic perspective to enable you to design better buildings or more sustainable.
Yeah, and as Michelle said, I think the focus early on was furnishings, interior, so furniture, carpet, again, focus on indoor air quality and VOCs. But I would say this is a government project, GSA, so we had to have 3 compatible products. So we would put in a design preference specification to say, have you gone through a certification process? So in this case, the cradle to cradle products were preferred, but we're still competing in the marketplace with other manufacturers. And again, now I think with more manufacturers having product declaration sheets, we can say how do they perform, and again, based on the transparency, can we do a deeper dive on some of the impact of those?
That's good. So you had another project example. If you want to talk about this Apex project and how you incorporated holistic sustainability in this.
Sure. And again, this was, when we think of the client, this was Apex Clean Energy, who's now North America's largest wind providers. They basically build the wind farms and as well as solar now and battery. And this is their headquarters here in Charlottesville. So there's a focus, obviously, as a business on decarbonizing the grid with clean energy, and they wanted to show that in the building. So there was a focus very early on efficiency with the goal of net zero energy for their offices, their 4 floors of the building. So we started with, again, a high performance facade. This is a rain screen with lightweight tactile cementitious panels that are actually mechanically attached, so they can be taken off and for maintenance or for reuse. This integrates Kawneer curtain wall. Again, this is a developer budget, so we put the glazing, the curtain wall where the people are in the common areas, and then design these windows where we have in the future you can come and put an operable window if this converts to housing in the future. So I think when we design offices, we think of next use first rather than we're taking this building down and putting it away. So again, focus on that connection to outdoors. There's a big focus on integrating cradle products in the interior, and here we used mass timber for the superstructure. So operational energy reduction first, then integration of the mass timber for another 50% reduction in the embodied carbon impact. But again, the users, that connection to natural daylight. We have southern views of mountains at the edge of Charlottesville, so having those people with the ability to connect to the outdoors.
That's
go ahead. I was saying, I think
no,
the
I
next.
just think
Go ahead. Sorry, Sneh.
so many nuggets, like what you mentioned about preparing for the future use. That's such a key point. What we are seeing, since the COVID and a lot of empty office buildings, and they are going through the conversion. But having that thinking beforehand when you are designing a project, that would be so helpful, in thinking through the future use of a building. So that's remarkable that you are already, thinking ahead and incorporating that in your design.
Well, that's I think when you think of now Manhattan, San Francisco cities looking at their older office buildings that have very deep, wide floor plates that again don't have that good access to daylight to outdoors. We're trying to design that from the beginning. So designing office that can be convertible to housing. And so we're thinking about optimizing that daylight from day one.
So you also mentioned mass timber. Obviously, that is growing because of need to reduce the embodied carbon as you design the building.
This was again led by Apex with the idea of decarbonization. So this is now the tallest mass timber on the East Coast. We're 101 feet, 6 stories of timber. And this is actually Nordic Structures out of Quebec that has certified CLT, the first in North America. So again, part of that was the material, the wood is the finished product too. So we're not adding drywall, cladding it. We're trying to feature it. But also think about in the future, these materials have value. So they're assets, not liabilities. If there was a concrete frame structure, we would be knocking it down or paying a cost to demolish it, where these are, beams that have integrity and value and can be reused later. But next use is is a critical one. So it's, again, optimized for housing in the future.
Interesting. So on the topic of decarbonization and reducing the embodied carbon, as you know, our product, building facade product, is aluminum intensive, and carbon footprint of aluminum is a significant contributor towards the carbon footprint of our product.
Yeah.
And Kawneer was started by an architect, similar to Cradle, and Alistair, you're practicing architecture. But it's interesting, the intersection of architects in our company. Then, Kawneer was started by Francis Plem more than 116 years ago, and his whole idea was to innovate around more durable. I mean, sustainability was not used that time, but he had designed a storefront, and he was walking by it even before it was finished. The material was starting to rot, and he thought there must be a better material and that better option, a more durable option, and he iterated and he landed on aluminum. And 100 years down the road, aluminum is the material of choice for building facade product or curtain wall storefront. More than 90% of the framing system in the commercial side is based on aluminum. But when we look at the evolution of aluminum, obviously all the thermal break technologies have evolved to help make the aluminum-based facade highly insulating. But when we look at the embodied carbon side of things, aluminum is very interesting. It has a wide range. It can go from 0.3 ton of carbon per ton of aluminum all the way to 25. And the reason for that is production of aluminum requires a large amount of electricity, and the source of that electricity, whether it's coming from a coal-fired power plant versus a hydroelectric power plant, can significantly vary that carbon footprint. And also, aluminum is fully recyclable, and it's one of the unique material where 75% of the aluminum ever produced is still in use. That's again staggering when we look at only 7% of the world economy is circular. So aluminum is remarkable in that sense. It's a circular material, and it's looked at as a key material as we look towards a decarbonized economy. So in building and construction, automotive, beverage packaging, lots of other sectors, aluminum is considered a critical material for decarbonization. So coming back on our facades, the carbon footprint of aluminum, again, it's a huge range. And recycled content in the aluminum only gives you half the story or not a complete picture in terms of the carbon footprint of the aluminum. So a material with, let's say 70% recycled content, but if your prime aluminum is coming from a coal-fired smelter, it could have a worse carbon footprint compared to, let's say, even 100% prime aluminum from a hydroelectric source. So we looked into it, and what Kawneer's new standard is that we are making sure that we use 50% minimum recycled content, and the primary to make that aluminum billet is coming from hydroelectric source. To bring our billet carbon footprint less than 3, around 2.5 ton of carbon per ton of aluminum. And when you contrast that with the North American average for primary aluminum is around 8.5. So it's like almost 60% better. We are trying to push the market and ourselves to more lower embodied carbon aluminum, so that aluminum remains the choice for facades with its high performance in terms of the operation side, allowing ventilation, durability, as well as lower embodied carbon. Alistair, I know you touched about end of the life and what happens whether it goes back into the economy or in the landfill, and aluminum is remarkable in that sense. So we are trying to move the needle in that life cycle approach, where we're reducing embodied, reducing operational, and making sure material goes back into economy at the end. So as we look at as a company on the holistic sustainability side, Kawneer has been known for its pioneering innovative solutions through its history. We are also looking to expand that and say we as a company want to care for the planet. We have set our greenhouse gas reduction goals in line with Paris Climate Agreement, 1.5 degree centigrade pathway. We have committed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. That's scope 1, 2, and 3. We have set goals around people in terms of diversity. We have gone through the EcoVadis assessment, which looks into the supply chain people in the supply chain and how they are treated. So we are again thinking beyond product and truly set ourselves to care for the people, care for the planet, and continue providing products which can help design sustainable, resilient, and allow design freedom to architects. So that's a little bit about us. But coming back to the point, you mentioned, Michelle, about cradle to cradle, looking at product and the company. We are thinking similarly. Not just we want to continue providing a great product, but also we want to do the right things as a company, care for the people and care for the planet. So our framework is again different than what exactly you see on the cradle side, but the thinking and the philosophy and the pillars of people, planet, and product, it is encompassing the theme of holistic sustainability.
Yeah, well, I think in the future, it's always going to be the bottom line that holds back, progress in investigations of your materials, your supply chain, your facilities, and going beyond regulation. But you're going to be more prepared. Kawneer's going to be more prepared for what's coming as far as EU directives, green claims, demands for verification. So I think, as much as companies can, to just explore some of these certifications, to push them beyond regulation, to push them in areas of reporting and third-party verification of their actual impact.
Interesting. I want to check for if we have any questions from the audience. If you have any question, feel free to type in. We are getting close to the time, but we'll look to answer that. Looking ahead, Alistair, are there projects you're excited about?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of finish on that last thought about the product slide, because as architects, we're typically focused on cost, performance, and aesthetics, and part of our job now is ecological health. So we want to understand the health of the products and some of the supply chain, and again the transparency on where those are coming from. So some of these tools help our job to do research the products, but also understand the background on these things. Because some of this can be overwhelming, but it can also be very helpful again for manufacturers or doing some of this homework, and again the transparency is the critical for us as designers.
Yeah, ultimately, like Sneh, I think it's helped you and Kawneer to be able to report more of the details behind your impacts and for sustainability reports and other things. So yeah.
Definitely. So we are on that journey again, obviously, with the product and the full transparency around the product. As I mentioned, we are looking to have more products under the cradle to cradle. As a corporation and entity, we have set 2030 goals, and we are looking to publish our results annually. and also be transparent in terms of how we are doing in terms of the climate, in terms of the supply chain, in terms of caring for the people, and several other environmental indices. So I know we have only a couple of minutes left. I'll maybe turn to both of you in terms of how do you see this landscape evolving, and if you have any suggestion for architects and designers in this space. So maybe who wants to go first? Michelle, if you want to take it.
I think it just goes back to what I was saying about the importance of third-party verification and having someone that is impartial, someone that is not part of your company, actually assessing where you stand as far as sustainability in all aspects, from corporate to facility to product level, whether it's the products you're developing, manufacturing, or purchasing. All of it matters, and all of it can help you to tell your story around sustainability. Even if maybe the cost benefit isn't there right at this time, eventually you are going to need to be more transparent, and eventually we are going to go past regulation. Maybe not as quick as we would like, but we will. So
definitely evolving rapidly, regulation
yeah.
front. So Alistair, your thoughts, closing thoughts?
I would just say again that the ability with digital tools as architects, now we can measure what matters. So we can look at the carbon impact, we can look at the transparency, the transport, and we can look at products and with our BIM models, take it to the clients and say, if we look at, again, a low carbon wood versus concrete, or again, a Kawneer aluminum versus say a steel or a different type of curtain wall, we can show those measurable conditions that I think clients understand. There could be a cost impact, but they understand the long-term necessity for it.
That's a great point. So again, highlighting that we have more and more tools available to measure what matters. So that's a great point to end this live stream. Thank you, Michelle and Alistair, for joining, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. I hope it was informative and you learned something new. And also, again, feel free to leave your comments, what we did well, if you have any questions or what we can improve upon. So thank you again for everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.